One of the things that we're dealing with today is the subject of writing memoirs. And memoirs, I want to know how many of y'all know this. I mean, it's a word we toss around, but what is it? It's a personal historical account that is of you yourself, or that you are intimately connected with. It could be another family member or another person, but there is a personal connection that makes that history real. So it's beyond being a biography or a historical account. It is actually a personal event. And it goes back to a French word that refers to a memorandum or a record of an event, is what it refers to. And I would share with you that Lisa is most qualified to do so. Anyone that would get an invite by Oprah Winfrey to give advice to Cindy Crawford as she was approaching her 50th birthday certainly has written something and has espoused this well enough for sure. So with that, I want to introduce Lisa Weldon. Lisa, you kind of have an outline that you're going to be working from with some key questions. And I'll be back here in the backdrop to stir things up if you get caught and ask you some questions. So let me turn it over to Lisa to introduce yourself, give a little bit of background before we get started, and then please dive straight in.
Okay, I'm Lisa Weldon. My book is 20 pieces. My background is advertising. I was an art director. I studied art and graphic design at Auburn. And spent, gosh, I'm still in it. So it's, let's see, I'll be 70 in a few months. So for 50 years, I've been in advertising, but on the art side. As an art director in advertising, I worked with a copywriter. So I had throughout my career different writers that I worked with. Never got into writing myself. At age 58, I had a huge event that happened in my life. I lost my home, my marriage, my last child left the nest. And the career that I had built had gone stagnant because I'd been busy raising kids and doing everything you get to do. Well, when all that happened, when I had a financial meltdown, I had to revitalize my career. And at age 58, in advertising. Well, once you hit 40 in advertising, you're considered dead wood. So at age 58, I had to reinvent myself. And my background was in print advertising, newspaper, magazine advertising, and television. And as you all know, that about 10 years ago went away and was replaced by website design, digital ads, social media. So 10 years ago, when all this happened, I found a course in New York at Parsons, a 30-day summer intensive that they offer, and to educate to educate adults like me. And I signed up for it, and I was going to learn in 30 days how to do web design, digital ads, digital and social media, and all that. So I rented a little Airbnb in New York, signed up for the class. Right at about a month before I was to go, my husband walked in and said that our house was going in foreclosure in 4 days. And 10 days before I was supposed to leave for New York, Parsons called and canceled the course. So of course, I decided not to go. It was probably, I couldn't figure out how I was going to pay for it. I should be home taking care of business. But my friend said, no way, you're going anyway. So that's when I took a map of Manhattan and I sliced it into 20 pieces and decided that I would go and every day walk one piece of that map. I would come home after the walk and I would teach myself how to blog, how to run Facebook ads, and how to, post on social media, how to use Twitter and all those things. I would teach myself how to do that, and I would use myself as the client, promoting myself. And I figured that if potential clients saw me, almost 60 years old, walking all of Manhattan and using all these tools, that perhaps they would give me a chance at business. So that's what my book's about. Walking those 20 pieces of Manhattan within 30 days. Obviously, my trip was transformational in my career, but those 30 days away and alone also gave me time to do a deep dive into me, into my present situation, into my family history, into my beliefs, my religious beliefs, my personal beliefs, political beliefs, and things like that. I was raised as an Air Force brat, but most of my years were spent in Mobile, Alabama, very traditional place to be raised. And being in New York was a stark contrast. I saw things up there that I'd never seen in my life, witnessed things. And all of that is what my book's about. So like I said, I went to New York. I walked one piece of the map, and then I came home and I blogged. And I blogged about that neighborhood and what I saw. But I never considered blogging as writing. I mean, that was just a new advertising tool, a new marketing tool. I knew I had to write at least 300 words. I knew I had to use keywords, and I had to put some of the most important keywords at the first sentence. I was learning all those things, but I never really considered it writing. And I certainly didn't consider myself a writer. But after I came home, I joined a group of women out of our church, and we took a class called by the book, The Artist Way. And one of our associate ministers taught the class. In this book, Julia Cameron makes you write 3 pages every single morning. They're called morning pages. And it's basically a brain dump. And she says, the minute you get out of bed, reach over, get your notebook, and just write 3 pages. They don't have to be edited. No, you can't edit them. They're brain dumps. They're brain dumps. You can write a grocery list. You can write a to-do list. You can rant. You can write a prayer. Whatever is in your head, write. So the first day of the class, we were supposed to bring a journal, according to this book. And as an art director, I'm not going to buy a journal. I'm going to make a journal. You know, I've got all these paper samples around and all these cool things. And so I put together myself a journal, just put pieces of paper together that I had in the house, you know, things from notebooks, pages out of magazines, just put it together and took it to the store and had it ring bound. And I guess I had just had a pedicure because I stuck this on the front of it for some strange reason. But this was my journal from my class. And for some reason, I started on the very last page of the journal and thought, well, I'm going to write forward. Who knows why I made that decision, but that's the decision I made. Well, the first line in the journal says, the artist way. I wonder if I can get by without writing 3 whole pages. I might have taken on too much. Writing for the blog might be overloading myself. So right here, the very first page shows you I didn't want to write. But I ended up filling the entire journal. And I hope my children will read this when I die, because some of my innermost thoughts are in this journal. And they came out the minute I woke up every single day for the 6 or 8 weeks I took this class. Again, I highly, highly recommend this book. And if you can do it with a group, it's even better. Again, I didn't consider blogging writing. But after those 30 days in New York, I came home. We ended up saving the house out of foreclosure, but we had to do a quick sale. I packed up the house, sold it, and a month later, it was my birthday. So what did I want to do for my birthday? I wanted to go back to New York just for a short weekend. And I found a blogging conference. It was called Blog Her. It was blogging for women. And they had a one-day course. I thought, well, I'll sign up for this course. And it's just a morning course. It's $70. And that way I can write off the whole trip. And so, or learn some more about how to blog, you know. But again, blogging was a tool for me. So I was trying to find out technically how it would help market in marketing. So I walk into the class, and there are a bunch of round tables, 8 chairs at each. And I plopped down in a chair. And there were 7 of us bloggers and a literary agent. And she sat right next to me. So the literary agent started to her right, what's your blog about? What's your blog about? And so forth. And I was the last one. And she asked me what my blog was about. And I said, well, I walked New York for 30 days and da 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 da. And she looked at me squarely in the eyes and said, you need to write a book. And I said, ma'am, I don't write. I don't even read that much. And she said, then get a ghostwriter. Your story needs to be told. Well, the 2 things you never tell a New York literary agent, you don't call her ma'am, and you certainly don't tell her you don't read. So I had made 2 huge mistakes. She reached in her pocket, she gave me a card, and she said, when you write your book, when you get it written, call me. Well, I stuck it in my pocket, and I went off lollygagging around New York, you know, walking away, having a good time. I got home, cleaned out my pocket. I stuck that business card on the side of my computer on the screen, where it hung for probably 5 years. So that's about the time that I started the course on The Artist Way. After those 6 or 8 weeks, there were 5 of us in this course that decided we wanted to do a writing group. Saturday morning from 9 till 11 o'clock. We met. We decided we were going to write 2 pages double-spaced, type 2. And every Saturday, we would pick a topic for the next Saturday. Then we come, read our 2 pages, get a short critique, and then pick next week's topic, which we did for a year. Well, you know, all of a sudden I started enjoying storytelling. I still didn't consider myself a writer at this point, of course, but I enjoyed storytelling. So, you know, I thought back to what the agent had told me, and this was about 6 or 8 months after I'd been in New York. One Saturday morning, I put a $5 bill in my pocket and put my tennis shoes on and walked about 2 miles through the neighborhood to a drugstore. And I went in and I bought a packet of index cards. And I thought, you know, maybe I can write this book, you know, maybe I can, I'll try this. So I took 30 cards out and taped them to the wall. On card number 1, I put what neighborhood I had walked. On card number 2, the second neighborhood, third, fourth, and fifth. I put on each one of those cards which neighborhood I walked that day. Now, remember, I had blogged every day and I also kept a personal diary while I was in New York. So I kept referring back to, I had that information as backup. So, okay, so I've got 30 cards. I looked up how many words a memoir has, typically has 60 to 80,000. I divided that by 30 and figured that each chapter needed 2,666 words. So I thought, okay. I broke it down in little pieces, like I did the map. I broke it down in 30 little pieces. And then I went back. On day one, I put what I experienced on that day. On day two, what I experienced, so forth. Again, going back through my journals and going back through my blogs. The very first day I was in New York, I witnessed the Pride Parade the morning after the equal marriage law was signed. And I saw things in that Pride Parade that I had never seen in my life, ever, and heard things and smelled things and felt things that I had never seen. So obviously that chapter was really easy. Anyway, so here on my wall is 30 cards, 30 days, 30 neighborhoods or 20 neighborhoods, and what I experienced. So that was the beginning of the outline, I guess, of my book. If you've read my book, or if you haven't read my book, the night before I left New York, I had a very, very, very vivid dream. And funny enough, the dream was a perfect metaphor of my trip. It was a dream that there was an under the streets of Manhattan was an old abandoned subway station where 100 graffiti artists went in and spent a year painting. And this really happened. A friend of mine had sent me the article, but I dreamed about actually going into it. And it was the metaphor being going deep underneath the frenetic streets of my life, dramatic. And I thought, that's a great ending to my story. I get in that subway station. So I wrote 2,666 words on going in that tunnel. Now, at this point, my book was going to be fiction because I absolutely was not going to tell all the stuff that I ended up telling in my book. And I have secrets about myself, about my insecurities, about my fears, problems with my family, my marriage, my child who had dealt with addiction. I certainly wasn't going to tell all that. So it was going to be fiction. So I was pretty proud of this last chapter, this 260 something words. And I found a young editor and I sent it to her, and she said, that's a good start. She was complimentary, but she had a lot of red marks on it. But so I thought, okay, maybe I'll need to learn a little bit more. So about that time, I landed the largest client I had ever gotten since I went out on my own. I put together a team of 5 to handle this client. I started making some money, getting myself financially, my footing back, and I hired a tutor out of LA who ended up tutoring me for 4 years. In the meantime, I had a friend say to me, let's walk Paris for 30 days. Of course, my response is, I can't do that. I can't afford to do that. She said, well, if I get the place, will you at least walk every arrondissement? It has 30 arrondissements and 1 per day, and it sounded great. And off we went. From that experience, Oprah's network called me and had read about my late life career reinvention and offered me, invited me to give Cindy Crawford advice on turning 50. Huffington Post invited me to chronicle my walks of Paris. They published my first one on the front page of their Living Fearlessly section. The city of New Orleans invited 25 social influencers, which was, I mean, quite a compliment that I was now a social influencer, haha, to come to New Orleans for an entire week, all expense paid. And we would chronicle their reinvention after Katrina. A lot of really good things happened to me within that year. And then I got that big account, and that was great. Shortly thereafter, I had to move out of the low rental house where I was in. I moved across town. And I guess you'd say I face planted. And probably pulled away from friends, from everything that was familiar. And because I had been on such a high for a year, I started facing reality. And that's when I started really writing. Writing from the gut, writing from the heart. As my tutor would say, go deeper. Every time I turn in something, go deeper, go deeper. Just vomit it, Lisa. Don't try to edit it, just vomit it. And it's the one piece of advice I give to anybody who wants to write their life story, who wants to just put it in writing for their children or write a book or whatever. Vomit it. Don't edit it. Put notebooks in your bathroom, put notebooks in your purse, put notebooks in your car. Just write everything and write it from the heart, and know that most of what you write won't be published, won't be in print. But you got to really go deep. As some of you know, a lot of you here are writers. There's a difference between, you've heard it, don't tell it, show it. What does it smell like? What does it taste like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? You've got to go somewhere quiet. You've got to get away. You've got to remove yourself to dig deep, to find that scent, or to find that taste, or find that feeling. But she, for 4 years, beat the hell out of me to dig that deep. And I think that I've had a lot of comments that people can feel that they are walking with me through New York. And New York was a great palette for me, because there are a lot of sounds, there are a lot of smells in New York. As somebody says, you walk in the subway, it smells like slow roasting urine, but there are a lot of feelings. There's a lot of energy in New York. So it was a great palette to paint with, let me say. But so is a country field or a southern kitchen or whatever you're writing about. Just pull all those things. And I think that my tutor, it was funny because my tutor was, I'm 5'9", she was probably 4'9". She was raised in New York. I was raised in Mobile, Alabama. She was Jewish. I was Christian. She was like an army sergeant, and I did anything to please. So we were as opposite as night and day. And she knew how to get to me. She knew. So if you get a tutor, if you get an editor, get one that stretches you, doesn't just agree with everything you've written, or just doesn't, yeah, that's great, it's ready to go, or whatever. So anyway, for 4 or 5 years, I wrote, I put together this manuscript. I did all the things I was supposed to do. She edited it, all this and everything. And so about year 5 after that, I went on my computer monitor and took that card, that literary agent's card down. And I said to my tutor, Jane, I said, Jane, I think I'm ready to shop this thing. She said, you're not ready, Lisa. Well, I started adding up all the money I'd spent on her, all the time I'd spent on her. And I thought, screw her, I'm going to send it anyway. I'm ready. So I went over to Party City. I bought 3 helium balloons, white. I went to the local park and had this little silly party for myself. Let those balloons go. And I said, I'm ready to let my story go. So I came home. I had my my manuscript, my proposal all done. I emailed her. And as you know, most literary agents in New York never respond. If they respond, it's might be 3 to 6 weeks later, maybe 2 months later. But I got an email from her in 4 days. And she said, Lisa, I really wanted to love this story, but you're not ready. So I admitted to Jane what I had done, and she fired me. She said, Lisa, if you're not going to listen to me, I'm not going to work with you. Well, I tried every way possible to get her to keep working with me. And she said no. So I put the memoir aside for 6 to 8 months and picked it up again and worked on it a little bit more and went and got an editor out of Washington. A month or so later, came back with a bunch of red marks, made all those corrections, sent it back to her. She said, I think you're ready. I think it looks good. I put it aside where it sat another 4 to 6 months. I hired a different editor, this time out of Oregon. Sent it to her. She had, you know, a good many red marks. And I made those corrections, sent them back to her. I think it looks good. Set it aside for 6 or 8 more months, 4 months, I don't know, for a long time. And this was 4 years after Jane had fired me. I looked her up and I said, Jane, how much would it cost for you to read over my manuscript and give me an assessment? Because she had been the toughest one on me of all the people I'd worked with. And she gave me a price. I sent her the money and she came back with a few little red marks, just a few. And she said, Lisa, I think it's ready. At that point, in the next couple of weeks, I sent it out to several publishers and decided on a publisher, and the rest is history. So that's my writing journey. Do I have any questions? So I did not really understand about, I knew the narrative arc in my memoir was not totally solid. The hardest thing I dealt with was my elevator pitch. Not until I really understood what a memoir was did I know how to fix it. And the minute I fixed it, I knew it was ready. A memoir is not about me. A memoir is about something I experienced and what I learned from it. And I had spent years blaming, years writing about my fears, years writing about me, what happened to me. But at the very end, I learned about what I learned. And the minute and that was only that was the last chapter, and I think it's 2 pages, maybe 3 pages. Not, and that's what was missing, was what I learned from the experience. You know, one of the people that I studied a lot on memoirs was Marion Roach Smith. And she says a memoir is about X as illustrated by Y to be told in a Z, which means it's about something universal, which for me, it was tackling trauma, as illustrated by something deeply personal, which was 30 Days Alone, a deep dive into my past, to be told in some length of a piece, in a book, an essay, a short story, whatever. But I am no longer the center of my tale, but it's a universal, much larger theme, a lesson that you tell. And that lesson was what I didn't have each time. When
Excellent.
you say it's like
Excellent.
a meeting with your therapist, oh, absolutely. That's exactly what my book was, a meeting with my therapist. I mean, really. But until I pulled it all together into a universal lesson, it was not a memoir. The first question, my editor, she had to teach our very first lesson. She said, "Have you ever annotated a book?" And I said, "What do you mean annotated a book? I don't even read that much." And she just went, "Oh shit." She taught me how to put words together in sentences, into paragraphs, how to add adjectives. I mean, she literally, I had to start from ground zero because my training was art, and it was certainly not words, and I didn't read. And so no, she never got into narrative. We didn't get that far. And that's why she kept telling me, "You're not ready yet. You're not ready yet. You're not ready yet." Because she had just gotten me through, in 4 years, had just gotten me through how to write a paragraph, you know, stuff like that. You know, I just woke up one day, I'll never forget. I just woke up one day and I said, a light went off. And I sat down and I wrote it. I put it in the manuscript and I knew it was done. I mean, you just kind of know what it's done when it's done. But I even did pictures. I have a wall in my office that's painted with chalkboard paint. And I even did the hero's journey goes up, it falls down and comes back. And I put the different scenes in my book on this chart. And I just couldn't, I mean, it was hard. I think if I ever write another book, which I'm in the process of doing, I will know my narrative arc before I start, because it took me 10 years to figure out what it was. It was my first book, so I give myself leeway on that. But I knew the minute I wrote it that I was done, that I had found it, that I was done, that the book was complete. So, and to your second question, I had been to a writer's retreat in Montana. And in that retreat, the woman gave us an entire list of different kind of editors, and kind of educated us on what to pay and what each one of them did. I also, through the Atlanta Writers Club, found proofreaders and line editors here. I was back in New York and have a friend up there who had written a book, and I asked her about editors. But it's important to know what kind of editor you want. Obviously, developmental editor is the first one you use, and down to proofreader or sensitivity editors are some of the last ones you use. But it's real important to know what their different skills are. Everybody I talked about in the book, I did one of two things. if I didn't contact them, I changed their names. And really only they would know who I was talking about. The other half, obviously my family, I either gave them the book and said, read it and see if you have any changes. Are you okay with it? I had one son that I don't think still hasn't read it, but he didn't care. I have a son who went through addiction, and I asked him, and he said, I said, I can take it out. It's, you know, he said, no, if it'll help somebody, some other family, leave it in. My ex-husband, I think he read the first 8 or 9 pages and didn't whatever. And so I took every reference to him, put it on a piece of paper, and I read it to him. And I said, you okay with this? He's the main character in the book. And he had 3 small changes, insignificant to the story, but 3 small changes. And he said, go with it, I'm ready. My sister, my good friend, Debbie, and my friend Pam, who's mentioned, I did the same thing with them. I copied every reference to them, sent it to them, and asked them if it was okay. And everybody agreed. So I feel like I covered my bases. The other thing is that I learned in involving other people that I played a part in it as well as they did. You know, when I first started writing, I blamed my husband for all the financial problems we had. He was an entrepreneur, and we had some hard financial roadblocks, and of course I started writing, and I blamed it all on him. Well, the more you write, like the more you go to therapy, you realize you have a part in it too. And I think you got to handle those characters in a realistic way. And if you're true to them, and you show their good parts as well as what maybe they did wrong, then I think you're okay. I mean, I think you're legally okay. Now, there's a lot of things I left out of my story that would have, that were true, that people would blame my husband, let's say, or somebody else in your book. But they weren't essential to the story. So I decided just to leave out a lot. There was a lot I left out that made the story even more interesting, probably. Nah, maybe not. But I think you just got to be true to that person and true to yourself. And like I said, a lot of times there's 2 sides to every story. If you feel uncomfortable about it, run it past a lawyer. Absolutely. I would do that in a heartbeat if I was uncomfortable with some kind of whatever. Who was it that said, if you don't want to be in my story, don't treat me wrong? Or
That.
she was a photographer. In her previous life, she was an attorney, and she has educated me very well about not using photography unless you have permission. And so I do have a few pictures in my book that I contacted the photographers, and I give them credit underneath and put their website underneath. But it's just, she would say to me, what if somebody used your words without you asking, whether they could find you or not? It's how they make a living. It's their property. So I would highly recommend not using them unless you've got permission. You can actually get sued, and they have all this software. Photographers now have all this software that can scan the internet. They put a code in their photographs, and they can scan the internet and find out. I had a client that was, she used a photograph off Google. Photographer slapped her with $600 fee. And yeah. So don't, get written permission and tell them you'll give them credit on top of that. And you know, if it's an old photograph and it's not something that's marketable for them, they'll probably say, yeah, go ahead. Well, I'm almost sure they read the book, but they have decided not to discuss it with me. You know what? At first, I felt insecure about, well, maybe they didn't like it. And then I thought, no, the book is my story, and maybe it hit a sore spot within them that they can't talk about it. I've had people say that they felt guilty after reading my book because they had no idea that I was going through all the stuff I was going through and that they weren't there for me.
Yes.
And that hit. Did I take it personally? No, but that hurt that I didn't include them during all these things that I was facing. But the one thing I have done, the way I market my book, is I go talk to women's group. My target audience is women 45 and over, and specifically the South, because I deal with a lot of Southern issues. And I hear over and over and over and over and over how my book related to their life. And so I've built the confidence now in my book and my story that if somebody comes to me and says, I didn't really like your book, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. Because one of the women that told a mutual friend she couldn't finish my book, at first it was just like, oh my God. And I realized she's a cheerleader type. She is one that brings a lot of joy to people, and she doesn't like hearing bad things. I mean, she's one of those people that in her room and pumps it up. And I said, of course she wouldn't like my book, and that's okay. So I now have a confidence about myself, about my story, that I feel like, bring it on, because I'd like to hear it. Now, the book I'm working on now is fiction, and I don't know what in the hell I'm doing. And I don't have the confidence yet about that book, but yeah, at first I did. Yeah.
Thank
And I'm
you.
kind of scratching my head too. I like these couple of family members, I'm scratching my head going, why haven't they even mentioned it? Yeah, I'm kind of scratching my head. I'm not taking it personally, but I'm kind of like, wonder what in that story hit a nerve with them. I wonder what it is about it that they don't feel they can talk to me about.
So how did you feel about that? I mean, would you agree that, the old adage, we write for ourselves, but we edit for our audience. How did that play out with the writing of your memoir?
I look at what I wrote for 4 years with my tutor, and it was nothing short of walking through all the stages of grief, anger, blame, desperation, and everything. I did not plan on publishing my book up to after I had signed a contract with a publisher. Even at that point, I thought, put it on the shelf, let your kids look at it after you die. So to your question, I think I had to grow after writing all that vomit, let's call it. I had to get to a point psychologically and emotionally to show that I had survived, that I had come up okay, that I had learned a lesson. Me. And then again, at that point, I was going to put it on the shelf. And my editor said to me, Lisa, you might help one other person by putting your book out there. And that's when I let go. So, like I said, I'd even signed a deal with a publisher, and I still wasn't going to let it go until I realized that I might be able to help somebody else that was going through what I went through. Did I write for my audience? I don't think I ever did. I don't think I ever wrote for my audience or edited for my audience. I think I just grew to a point inside of me to where I felt comfortable with myself. I don't think I ever thought about my audience, writing to or editing to my audience. I don't think I ever did, Mike. I was getting ready to pull it even after I signed a contract. So I never really had my audience. Now, I will say that I wanted to portray my husband. He was a good man. Had financial difficulties, but he was a good person. And I wanted to make sure that I was fair to him. I wanted my audience to know that wanted them to know that he was a good person. Did some things that hurt the family, but I wanted them to know. So maybe I did write unconsciously to the audience, but I guess it was just more of my conscious, I guess. I wanted to be fair. One thing that I remember somebody telling me that was like a slap in the face. Once you release your book, it then becomes theirs to do whatever. Once you release your story, it's theirs to do whatever they want to with it. It's no longer belongs just to you. Somebody may take that story and interpret their own life through it and read something else into it because of some experience they've had in their life that I never had. There's a snippet in there about my mother. My mother, when I go back home, everybody says to me, she was my favorite teacher. We loved your mother. Well, I had a more personal relationship with her and saw some hard parts about her that I write about. So I was worried about what people were I was really worried about all those people that loved my mother were going to say about some of my words. But you know what? More times than not, people say, oh, your mama spoke her mind. Oh, we knew about that, but we loved her. And I just last month gave my book to my mother's best friend who's 91 and still living. And you know what? She wrote me the sweetest little handwritten note. And she said, I've bought 5 of your books. I'm sending them to all my friends. I loved your book. Your mama was very complicated. I got some of that harsh treatment like you did, so I totally understand, but your mama was a good person and she loved you and whatever. So, once you give your story out there, yes, they can interpret it however they want to. But more times than not, if you're fair to that person, then, people will understand, I guess. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit. I'm marketing my book, but going and talking to women's book clubs. I've probably spoken to about 20 of them. And I feel after writing this memoir, the question I get all the time is, you told so many secrets. Are you embarrassed walking in front of all of us and we know all this about you? It is the most freeing thing I have ever done in my life. And it has brought me self-confidence that I've never had in my life. We spend a lot of time, we Southern women of my age have spent their lifetime prettying up our lives and, not airing dirty laundry. And it takes a lot of energy to cover that stuff up and to pretend and to keep secrets. But after writing this memoir, I tell people, it's just like I ran through the streets buck naked and nobody laughed. Nobody said, oh, she's fat or she's ugly or whatever. They are saying to me, thank you for being so honest. You hit on a nerve. You touched a part of my life. You gave me a perspective that I've never had. And I have women in these groups who tell me stories they've been through, and several of them have teared up. And I feel like sharing my story has, I used to say, if I can get one woman to take 30 days away and alone for herself, my job will have been done. Well, I've now had 3 women come back to tell me that they've done it and it's changed their lives. And knowing that my book has done some good, I mean, Lee, that's the best compliment you can have, I don't know. It's been the most freeing thing I've ever done. I mean, freeing.